Welcome back to Ignite Agility. Today I have Bas Vodde, co-creator of Large Scale Scrum.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Well, you already mentioned I'm Bas Vodde, co-creator together with Craig of LeSS. We tend to prefer to call it LeSS and not Large Scale Scrum at this point. Live in Amsterdam, been in product development all my life, lived in Asia most of my life. Most of my time goes to working with products and discovering much more still because there's much more to discover still about product development.
Is this the first time you have taught in Minneapolis?
Yeah, it was asked to me earlier, and I was thinking about it because it's like the I think third or fourth time I've been here. Once in the winter, not again anymore, and but I realized it is the first time I've been teaching here. Yeah,
And I know your opinion of our Americanized Asian food selection. We'll have to do better.
it's okay. It's just a different cuisine, and when I stay longer, I do eat a lot of Asian food. So when I stay longer, I do need that, and I'll try it usually, and it's edible. I mean,
Well, there you have it. Edible.
they have some. No, they have some good places. Like I was in Seattle with a friend of mine years ago, and he said there's this new place. It's what's it, Ding Tai Fung. I was just opened there, and I was like, okay, I know. He hadn't realized yet that in Singapore that was next to our office, and it was like we went there for lunch three times a week.
Find something good, stick with it. So what I wanted to talk to you about, having been a graduate of yours, a graduate of Craig's, and kind of caught the LeSS bug a number of years ago, what I'm seeing people in the Scrum community just not understand is the leadership aspect of a product owner, I guess true product owner, if we want to say it that way, and then what's expected of what we call developers in one team Scrum that LeSS refers to as development team.
And just team.
Sorry, just team. Because it's a common myth with product ownership that, the product owner writes all the user stories.
Absolutely. I hope that most of the LeSS product owners write nearly no user stories.
Zero.
I hope nobody writes one of the to take a complete sidetrack.
That's okay.
One of the things that often annoys me is working in products, and they decide that everything must follow the user story format.
The Connextra, as a, I want.
Correct. And it becomes extremely verbose. And honestly, if you add it to the backlog as a user, as a buyer, I want to buy a book so that I can have a book. Please just write buy book. Don't follow this kind of nonsense templates all the time. It just makes it so much more verbose. And actually, it causes a funny problem in some of the LeSS adoptions because we do work a lot still with in-person planning. And in in-person planning, a common thing to do is you use a technique called put the cards on the table, where you if you use a digital tool like, unfortunately, Jira for your product backlog, then Jira has a wonderful feature to print out the cards so that you don't need to use it. But it does cut off the description. And if you wrote everything in this user story format and it cuts it off, it gets really, really annoying. But yeah, to get back to the main topic, most items in a backlog, we don't call them stories in LeSS. Most item in a backlog, actually, we don't call them stories in Scrum either.
No, it's just item.
But anyway, most items in the backlog usually come from the teams or from somewhere else, but not necessarily the product owner.
Yeah, a customer, a user.
Some product management group, some whatever. depends on your kind of product.
People will say, but Angela, if we don't use user stories, what do we use? And I say, words.
Well,
Plain words.
what unfortunately people often don't know is the concept of story and the story format are two separate things.
Mm-hmm. Right? That's why I referred to Connextra, the company that popularized the template.
Yes, absolutely. So before that, stories were just stories. So it was just a one line. So by book is a story. It doesn't have to follow that particular format. And the idea of by book as a story is you can have that conversation about that. And unless that conversation usually happens in a multi-team refinement session. So therefore, just writing by book and no additional things in your description of that item is most of the time enough for having that conversation.
So in one team Scrum, we expect the people doing the work, which are called developers in one team Scrum, to just write down their understanding, to write down what they heard. Would you say that that's the same expectation of the team in multi-team backlog refinement in LeSS?
I would say it's up to the team. I'm a fan of just using memory as a storage, but I'm also reminded, especially as I age, that memory is not always the most reliable storage place. But that's the trade-off that teams will need to choose. How much do you write down for remembering enough of it while you're implementing? Because there tend to be a couple of weeks between the clarification and the implementation of an item.
So that's a common pitfall I see in Scrum 101. Who writes things for everybody else? Where's the business analyst equivalent? And the reality is there isn't one. So in the LeSS adoptions that you've been a part of, because you've been quite clear that, yes, you do training, but you spend a lot of your time in LeSS adoptions so that you're bringing practical experience, case studies, stories to your classes. Do you see that learning hurdle in a LeSS adoption with where's the business analyst? You want us to write stuff? What?
Well, let me first clarify that I work in LeSS adoptions not just to keep my training fresh, but simply because it's more fun building products than
yes, it is
doing the training.
Yes, I didn't mean to insinuate you had some nefarious reason for doing those, to make your training good.
I do consider product development and learning about how to do that better my main thing, and the training to be just a sharing of what I learned, and luckily people find that mostly useful. And let me get back to what the question was again.
Do you see that same kind of aha moment or struggle from the people going, what? You want me to... Where's my business analyst?
Well, it depends a lot on the group. For developers in the team, for the people in the team, they do have to go to what I always refer to as one of the two journeys of the team, which nowadays I call the programmer to product developer journey. And basically it's a change in attitude. So the programmer attitude, and it's a terrible name, but I haven't found a better one. A programmer attitude is I'm responsible for programming, for writing code, for just that part. And somebody else's responsibility is to tell me exactly what to do. And if somebody tells me what to do, I just need to listen to what that person tells me what to do, and then write it in code. But that attitude towards work from a LeSS perspective, we don't consider super useful. And we expect people in the team to have what we call a product developer attitude. And it starts simply with a different assumption. Of course, we have the assumption in LeSS that we want to connect teams, people building a product directly with people using a product. So we don't want to have in-between people. And given that assumption, the person who is using a product, they have a particular problem that they need to solve. That's where features arise from, or that's where the entire product arose from. But most of the time, they're not necessarily very knowledgeable about the entire product or what is possible in technology. I expect a team to have an overview of the product and to understand the possibilities of technology. And you want to bring those two pieces of information together. So a team needs to understand the problem they're trying to solve, because we can't expect users to understand all of the possibilities. And then clarification of requirements becomes a dialogue between those two rather than a one-way conversation. So it's discovery of requirements through a conversation, through the team understanding the domain and the problem. And therefore, business analysts, if you used to have those, they tend to be super, super useful as members of the team.
Just members of the team.
You're just a team member, just like any other team member. You don't work ahead of the rest of the team. You pick up items from the backlog just like anyone else. But because, so then I mean the sprint backlog in this case, but because of hopefully your domain knowledge and your technical knowledge, you become much more an educator and potentially a facilitator of that conversation.
So I heard two things that I think will be really, really important to specifically call out. No go-between. So product owner, not a go-between.
Correct.
They can bring users, subject matter experts, customers. The refinement conversation isn't closed. You know, the refinement conversation isn't just the people using less.
Absolutely.
And the second thing I heard you say is refinement is really about learning.
Absolutely. Refinement is about learning the domain, the problem, clarifying. If you wish, it's large part of what traditionally business analysts might do actually just happens in refinement, which is why you don't want to prepare for that because it kind of ruins the refinement then.
And instead of one person getting all the learning, everyone. So we're building more of a learning organization, not having just pockets or silos or only one-off kind of people who know all the answers.
Yes. And the one product owner, because we haven't made that explicit yet, but unless you have one product owner for your entire product, the one product owner is still super important, but he's important for reiterating the entire vision of the product, makes prioritization, deals with roadmaps and things like that. So usually it tends to be quite a senior person, needs to be very aware, involved in what's going on in the organization. And even in events like refinement, usually he doesn't do a lot because he's not involved in the clarification. He's always there, but he tends to help people understand how a particular feature fits within the vision of the product or whether the priority is. So sometimes what happens is teams are clarifying it, and they might come to the product owner and they say to the product owner, you know, we don't think this is important, right? Because you actually want the teams to have a strong opinion on prioritization also. And then often the product owner simply listens and changes the priority according to the team. But sometimes the product owner then explains why certain things are important from an angle that the teams might not see yet.
Business need, user's point of view,
or
those kinds of things.
Or sometimes something is a high priority for political organizational reasons.
That is
if
true.
you don't build it, somebody gets angry. Even if it might not even have that much value at that time. If you didn't build it, it gets you in trouble.
Well, and you did say we hadn't clarified that yet, though one product owner in a less adoption. So maybe we should clarify less adoption, 50 people or fewer, which does that equate to like 8 teams? No more than 8 teams in a less adoption?
Yeah, it's usually roughly 8 teams. The 8 is so less is defined by the less rules, and in the less rules, 8 is always between quotes, meaning it's not a hard number.
It's a guideline.
Yeah, and like 8, if it's a lot smaller than 8, so before you, let me take a step back here. So less is divided in less, or what we sometimes refer to as basic less, which is from 2 to around 8-ish teams, and then less huge, which is kind of the way to go beyond around 8 teams to we have not really figured out any maximum size.
Yeah,
and
so less huge once you get potentially hundreds of people working on the same product.
Then you'll end up with less huge. So Angela was referring to the 8 as kind of the switching point from basic less to less huge. That's usually around 8 teams, and 8 teams is often around 50 people. But then you also have in less the more with less principle, which suggests try to get away with the least amount of structure and process that you can get away with. So therefore, if you're one product owner, which is usually the main reason for moving from less to less huge, if he's comfortable with 9, 10, 11 teams, then don't switch and just keep with basic less structure. One of the less adoptions that's been ongoing, there's a case study on the less side, which is less.works. It is the Ysoft case study.
Mm-hmm.
They went on to, I think, 14 teams without ever switching to less huge structure.
I had the pleasure of meeting some of the Ysoft leaders. Jürgen de Smet and I connected them with one of my less clients to learn from each other. We just got to be flies on the wall in the conversation, so it was kind of fun.
And you recorded that so that we can share that to
We did not.
Oh.
Right. We are recording this, though. And so I know you said you prefer less nowadays instead of calling out the scale, the dreaded S word, the other S word, scaling. So there are so many scaling flavors popping up on the market. And most, we don't need to call them out, but most have a team product owner.
Yeah.
Which is not Scrum, as we know. But can you say anything about those anti-patterns, such as reducing overall transparency? You know, we've certainly brought up the go-between lost in translation problem, but what does that do to transparency?
Well, so let me start off with your starting statement related to scaling frameworks. We don't really like to refer to less as a scaling framework. We prefer to call it an organizational design system, because part of less is how do you structure your organization, and the scaling frameworks tend to stay out of that.
Correct. You and I have both heard one of the scaling framework people say, we don't touch organizational structure.
Yeah.
And unless we are touching organizational structure.
and that same person promotes systems thinking and ought to know that all of those things are connected to each other, and changing one without changing the other causes an inherent conflict in organizations. But let's not go there further.
For sure. Okay.
So of the what people refer to as scaling framework, as far as I know, it's mostly less and less's little brother, Nexus, that insist on having one product owner. And Nexus being created by the creator of Scrum. So that should kind of give a hint to the original idea of a product owner also.
Richard Hundhausen helped the creator of Scrum with that, and he likes to say about the product owner, there is one Santa Claus. There are many elves. but there is only one Santa Claus.
It's funny, but I'm not sure I like it.
Okay, I won't tell Richard. Sorry, Richard.
It's okay. Now let me regather my thoughts again.
I'm good for squirrel moments. Yeah.
So most of the other scaling approaches tend to misuse the product owner role, not as intended. And as both of us know, there's a great video available also for that, which is Michael James's misconceptions of product owners. Maybe we'll post that in underneath
the show notes.
This video to get more insight on that. But your question was mostly about transparency. And if you look at transparency, the problem is not so much the product owner per team. That leads to different problems. But it's the product backlog or team backlog. Because in less, we don't just have one product owner for the entire product. We also have one product backlog for the entire product.
Correct. Yeah.
And all of the teams are working off that backlog. And then that backlog is not does not have a column to which item to which teams it belongs, because then you're just cheating and you're pretending that it's one backlog. But you leave really open what the teams are going to work on when the sprint starts. Having many small backlogs leads to the problem of transparency, because it becomes very hard to see your product prioritization, and it becomes harder to actually work according to your product's prioritization. The product owner, so the team product owner's biggest problem is that he's taking over work that the team ought to do. And so he's kind of avoiding, we talked about clarifying features and creating items from a LeSS perspective, from that product developer perspective. That's a responsibility of the team. And if you have a product owner and they start doing those things, they take over that responsibility of the team, and it pushes back the team into more of that programmer
mindset.
And that's just almost, I dare to say, simply a waste of people's intellect. So you want to have that responsibility much more in the team. And the team, great products are built by people who understand why they're building that problems, what problems they're solving. Great products, in my experience, are not built by team who read specs and stories and just write code accordingly.
So with the few minutes we have left, is there anything else you want to share on this topic that I have not asked you?
On the topic of the one product.
Mm-hmm. True product owner.
So that maybe I want to reiterate. In most of the LeSS adoptions, a product owner is a person that organizationally is able to make product decisions also. So, for example, frequently if you have a product, as in a product where you actually sell the product to a market, there you typically have a product management organization, and then I mean not the product management that deals into all of the details that nowadays is often called product management, but product management that's a little bit higher level. And often the head of product management, for example, is then the product owner. In more service-like companies where you have this business IT split, often the person responsible for the budget of IT is the product owner. Right? Because product owners need to make hard decisions, and they need to deal with the organizational conflicts in priority.
Like there always is.
Nowadays, I work on a LeSS adoption, and I work almost daily with a product owner there. Hi, John, if you see this. And a while ago, a couple of months ago, we were in the airport in Helsinki, and we're sitting there, and suddenly he turns to me and he says, Bas, I'm the most hated person in the company. And I'm like, where does this come from? So it's like, what do you mean? And he says, my job is to say no. I need to say no to the teams. I need to say no to customers. Everyone hates me because I only say no. And I was laughing. I thought that was so funny. But I thought it was a decent description of the responsibility of a product owner, right? You need to do that prioritization. And prioritization means that in most products, you get much more requests than you can possibly handle. If you say yes to all of these requests, you'll overload the teams, It'll destroy your product, and you get into this ugly cycle where your product gets worse and worse. And I know many people probably will listen are in this cycle. And one product owner gets you out of that by prioritization, by saying no, and doing that in a way that is politically acceptable so that he doesn't organizationally kill himself. And it's a very hard job and often a fairly senior job.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming to Minneapolis, not only for the course, but for taking time to chat here to share with our listeners.
Thanks for the invite.
And we're clear.